welcome to Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. Thank you. Wow. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, thank you so much. Thanks, Anne. Oh my gosh. I'm very excited about being here, and I have to say I've been a lot of places, done a lot of things, seen some incredible sights, but I never thought I'd be on Broadway. You know, for many reasons. One of which is that I literally cannot carry a tune, no matter how light the tune might be. When my daughter was born, I used to sing to her every night, rocking her to sleep until she could talk. And when she was, I don't know how many months old, she says to me, putting her little finger on my lips after I'd done my rendition of Moon River, "No sing, Mama, no sing." I want to start with saying thanks to Anne and everyone who put together this day. Thanks to Tom Shoemaker. Back in the 1990s, Disney Theatrical revitalized this beautiful theater, which in turn helped to revitalize Times Square, making Broadway a world-class destination once again. So thanks to all of you, and in particular to everyone who is on the stage or behind the scenes or doing whatever you do to make Broadway and theater in New York a living reality. Thanks for using your creativity and imaginations, your skills, your talents to tell stories that bring us together, for creating spaces that make everyone feel welcome. And I have to say, thank you for some of my favorite moments of the last few years. After the catastrophe in November of 2016, I have to confess that long walks in the woods and my share of Chardonnay got most of the attention. But I also saw a lot of shows, and boy, did that help me. No matter what was happening, there was nothing like sinking into a seat, feeling the excitement and anticipation as the lights went down, and being transported out of our crazy world for at least a little while. And it's really one of my most cherished roles, being an audience member. Whether I'm watching my granddaughter's eyes light up at Frozen or feeling new appreciation for lines from King Lear, like I'll do my best, Glenda, in interpretation here. 'Tis the time's plague when madmen lead the blind. Now, there's another reason I'm really glad to be here, because celebrating Women's Day on Broadway this year is 25 years from the time when women from 189 countries came together in Beijing to declare with one voice that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And since then, wherever I go, people quote those lines back at me. I was at the UN all morning working with a group of Afghan women and UN representatives so that the women would not be undermined and sent backwards by any kind of a peace deal that is reached. They've been incredibly brave during all these years. And so I feel a strong obligation to keep talking about the great unfinished business of the 21st century, namely expanding the rights, opportunities, and full participation in every aspect of society by women and girls. And of course, that includes the theater, but it also includes so much of what makes it difficult for women to be full participants in their society. I mean, just to name a few things, for too many women, including those who work the unpredictable hours of theatrical jobs, affordable childcare can be out of reach. And we remain the only country in the developed world without national paid family leave, and more than a quarter of private sector workers don't have a single paid sick day, which is complicating how we're going to respond to the threat of the coronavirus. And then, of course, reproductive rights face unprecedented threats, and the pay differential never seems to close. And the World Economic Forum found that if we continue at our current pace, it will take 100 years to close the global gender gap. So we literally cannot wait that long. And that means that we need more help and more ideas and more storytelling, because we've got to break down the barriers, many of which are inside our minds. Now, in recent studies, a psychologist named Madeline Heilman found that when a man and a woman compete for a position of authority, there is a clear bias against the women. These studies were carried out with blind resumes. In other words, people were presented two resumes. One said Jane on them, one said Joe on them, but everything else was the same. Education, experience, everything was the same. And after looking at these two resumes that had the same qualifications, 86% of the people studied determined the man was more competent. And not only that, based on these resumes, 83% saw the man as more likable. We're looking at blind resumes, remember? The only difference is Jane and Joe. But you read about a person who has worked hard and striven and made progress for herself, and the man is more likable, good old Joe, and the woman, Jane, poor Jane. She's seen as hostile and pushy and selfish and abrasive and untrustworthy. Now, we love Jane. Well, actually, we are Jane. And this unconscious bias informs everything from the way we behave in the workplace to the way we vote. Because women and men have images in their heads of what a leader is supposed to look like and sound like. And we're seeing the results right now because our next presidential debate won't pass the Bechdel test. So finishing this unfinished business is not just about people running for office. It's about changing minds and hearts. And it really matters when women's stories are told on the most high-profile stages in America. And so I've been personally encouraged by the progress we've seen toward diversity and inclusivity over the past few seasons on Broadway, but don't stop. You know, in 2016, not otherwise a banner year for our country, it was a high watermark when it came to celebrating voices that were once marginalized. I was thrilled when Hamilton and The Color Purple swept the Tony Awards, and Eclipsed and Shuffle Along and On Your Feet earned well-deserved nominations. But the next season, not so much. And as you know, Broadway doesn't have one single artistic director or board that makes sure that diversity and inclusivity are, raised at every turn. So we have to keep looking for those who are carrying the banner forward. So in 2017, Lynn Nottage and Paula Vogel finally made their Broadway debuts with Sweat and Indecent. Now, of course, think about it, they both arrived on Broadway at the apex of their careers with Pulitzer Prizes under their belts. You know, some of their male counterparts, you know, maybe younger, perhaps less distinguished, but still have their works produced, because remember, women are judged for what we've done, while men are praised for what they promise to do. But nevertheless, we persist, and last season, young John Lee made history as the first Asian American woman with a play on Broadway, and you know, you gotta wonder whether people who showed up for straight white men were in for a bit of a shock. But Teresa Rebeck returned to Broadway with Bernhardt Hamlet. Heidi Schreck's What the Constitution Means to Me was a sensation. Aeneas Mitchell's Hadestown swept the Tonys. It was the first Best Musical written and directed solely by women. So I think there's a lot to celebrate, and you just heard from Katori Hall, who wrote the book for Tina, which was then directed by Phyllida Lloyd. And I think we need to keep raising these names and these accomplishments. Diana Paulus, Diablo Cody, Alanis Morissette collaborated on Jagged Little Pill, a musical produced by Eva Price. And Bess Wall made her Broadway debut with Grand Horizons, directed by Lee Silverman. Anna Shapiro is directing The Minutes. Lucy Moss, who you heard from, co-wrote and co-directed Six. You know, I've got to see that. I mean, really. I've always wondered, you know. There are parallels. And Rebecca Teichman, directing Sing Street, choreographed by Sonia Taya. Marianne Elliott created a gender swap production of Company. I mean, there are so many talented women in front of the lights and behind the lights. Diana, story of Princess Diana of Wales, composer Janine DeSoris, Caroline or Change is returning to Broadway. Paula Vogel, How I Learned to Drive, finally arrives. And the stories of women and girls are gaining traction off Broadway too. Now, one of my favorite American icons, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was once asked when there will be enough women on the Supreme Court, and she answered, when there are 9. Well, I think that's a goal to keep in mind and to be clear about it, to keep working with each other and supporting each other. Rachel Chavkin put it perfectly at the Tonys. This is not a pipeline issue. It is a failure of imagination by a field whose job is to imagine the way the world could be. And boy, do we need your imaginations now. We cannot afford to go backwards. We cannot afford to get discouraged and disappointed and throw up our hands in despair at everything we see across our country and the world. So think about this. One of the most important things you can help us do is to imagine the way the world could and should be. You are change makers. You are people who we need desperately now more than ever. You know, it was a group of gutsy women in 1917, amid the darkness of a world war, 2 years before the 19th Amendment, who came together to form the Stage Women's War Relief. They worked around the clock, doing everything from packing medical supplies to raising funds to caring for widows and orphans and the wounded. During World War II, it was women who took in refugees and boosted morale through the famous stage door canteens, women who founded the American Theatre Wing, who've been at the forefront of pushing this industry forward for over a century. So I hope that as you celebrate women on Broadway today, you walk out of here knowing you're going to celebrate women and our stories every day. You're going to find ways to continue to light those candles, not curse the darkness. In 1933, Eleanor Roosevelt, who loved the theater, wrote a book titled It's Up to the Women. And I could not agree more. It is up to us. Enough with the concerns and the worrying and even the complaining. Enough with the disappointment and the discouragement. We need to keep our voices rising. We need to keep telling our stories. We need to keep going because nothing is more important than imagining and then inventing the future that we want. Thank you for what you do every single day.